Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. There we go. So thank you for that introduction, Rich, and thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening to learn more about how we can all maintain a healthy and safe landscape under drought and water restrictions. Many of you may not be familiar with the UC Marin Master Gardener organization. We are volunteers trained by the University of California Cooperative Extension, and we provide to you, the public, research-based information on home horticulture, pest management, sustainable landscape practices, and tonight, fire smart landscaping. I can't see any of you, but I can imagine as you read this title, heads are shaking left to right. Some of you may have grimacing faces and thoughts of, you cannot be serious. We are facing what will be a very long, dry summer with possible weather conditions like lightning that could set off another round of fires like those we experienced last year. One of the tenets of a fire smart landscape is to keep your plants well hydrated. But on April 20th, the governing boards of the Marin Municipal Water District, who today is also known as Marin Water, and the North Marin Water both adopted drought. So how do we keep our plants well hydrated to have a fire smart landscape when water is limited? We'll start to answer this question tonight. In the next 15 minutes, I'll provide some tips on how to prioritize plants in your landscape during drought and with water restrictions. To keep your landscape fire smart, you may need to sacrifice some plants to save others. I'll also offer some changes you can make to your current gardening practices that will help you optimize your water usage. And then I'll provide some tips on how to retain moisture in your soil to keep your prized plants well hydrated and healthy, which is key to having a fire smart landscape. And then Kirby will focus on immediate actions you can take to maintain your landscape along the exit routes from your home to your vehicle to ensure safe exit during a wildfire evacuation. During a time of drought, you want to prioritize and care for your older mature trees, your younger trees, and your valued plants over those that can be easily replaced at less cost in the future. Trees are particularly valuable not only because of the time they take to mature, but also in terms of the benefits they offer, like visual interest, shade, privacy, noise reduction, wind protection, air quality, carbon sequestration, and wildlife habitat. Mature trees can often survive one season with only 1 or 2 deep waterings during now the spring and the summer. But given the conditions that we had last year, 2 seasons without enough water can result in severe drought stress, making them more vulnerable to damage from diseases and insects, which can ultimately lead to death. Younger trees are still developing their root system, so it's important this season to keep the soil moist to ensure their roots continue to develop. But before you start watering, be sure you know what the water requirements are for the tree species, because different species require different amounts of water and sometimes no water at all. If you don't know the species, you can email our help desk with photos and they can help identify it and can give you some information on how to care for it. For the trees and plants that do require water, we like the motto, water slowly, deeply, to encourage and support root growth deep into the soil. For trees, water at the drip line, which is located at the edge of the canopy, which you can see with the yellow arrows on either side of the canopy. To do this, it's a easy practice to use a soaker hose, and that works well to deeply water your trees, but make sure you set a timer if it's not connected to an irrigation controller. Fruit and nut trees. They need adequate water in their root zones continuously from bloom until harvest to produce a good crop. It's possible to keep your trees alive with limited water, but crop production will probably be greatly reduced and possibly even stop. And vegetables, they can be difficult to maintain during a drought, but with careful planning, it can be done. As a rule of thumb, water is most critical immediately after transplanting, during the first few weeks of development, and during flowering and fruit production. There's a very informative video filmed by the University of California Cooperative Extension at Sonoma called How to Grow Vegetables with Less Water. It's also available on our YouTube channel, and I believe that Jim will be able to add that information to our Q&A panel. The focus of the video is on techniques to help your vegetables thrive during restricted water use. Most established shrubs can survive long periods of dry soil. Now is a really good time, especially before May 1st, to thoroughly water your shrubs, and then possibly 1 to 2 thorough waterings in the summer keeps most well-established shrubs alive for at least 1 season. And I want to briefly touch on the point about eliminating plants to minimize competition for water. The more closely plants are spaced, the greater their density, and this creates competition for water. So while it may seem painful to remove some of your plantings this season, a fire-smart strategy is to keep your prized plants well hydrated, well spaced, and clean of dead debris, making them more resilient to heat and embers and discouraging flames from hopscotching from one plant to another towards your home. Once you identify the species of the trees and plants you want to save and know their water requirements, you'll want to check them frequently for signs of drought, which could include curled leaves that look scorched. How and how much water you provide depends on a variety of factors and conditions. There may be factors like heat retentive surfaces like your home or other buildings on your property, or rocks or gravel, or a stone pathway. And that all can contribute to moisture loss in the soil, and those plants will need more water. Areas under trees or shade structures like a home may produce an environment with enough shade that those plants can do fine without extra water. And of course, weather conditions play a role in the rate of water loss in plants. Longer days with more hours of sun exposure, higher air temperatures, and increased wind can contribute to more rapid water loss later in the season. I'll talk about soil and how the condition of your soil can retain moisture for your plants in an upcoming slide. Regardless of how you water your trees and plants, early morning is the best time to water since the rate of evaporation from the soil is lower. If you hand water your plants, use a garden hose with a flow meter attached between the hose and shutoff nozzle to monitor water usage. These flow meters are very inexpensive, and they're easily found in most hardware stores. An irrigation system and controller can be your friend and will save considerable water, money, and time. If you have a drip irrigation system with a controller, this year more than any is time to review how your controller is programmed and if your irrigation system is working efficiently. A valuable feature on most controllers is the interval setting that prevents runoff by setting multiple times for the irrigation to turn on and off. So for example, you can water for 10 minutes at 6 in the morning and then again at 7 in the morning for another 10 minutes rather than 20 minutes all at once. This feature is especially effective with clay soil and for slopes, because many of us have properties with landscaping on a slope. Fire moves very quickly on slopes, as you saw in the earlier slide, and so keeping your plantings well hydrated, properly spaced, and free of dead debris is very important. The Marin Master Gardeners and Marin Water are in partnership to provide homeowners with information and advice on improving irrigation practices to help conserve water. It's called Marin Friendly Garden Walks, and tonight Judy is available to answer water conservation questions in the Q&A box. If you have further questions after tonight, you can make an appointment for an hour-long garden walk consultation through our website. So Rich, I'm gonna end the show here for a minute and take some questions that might be coming in.
Great. Thanks, Faye. That was really good. You touched a little bit on vegetable gardens, and I know vegetable gardens are very popular. Do you have some further recommendations about what kind of gardening tips we can use if you do want to try to grow some vegetables in a drought?
Sure. There are many vegetables that can be planted, and the key is going to be to look for low water characteristics. So, for example, there are California native edibles like blue elderberry and golden currant. And then there are other like Mediterranean herbs like lavender or oregano, thyme, rosemary, sage. And there's also crops that mature quickly, like in the 50 to 60 day period. And because they need fewer days to mature, they need less irrigation. So some of those crops might be like beans or broccoli, carrots, chard, kale. The list goes on. It's actually pretty broad, and our viewers can see a full list of vegetables on our website in a section called How to Conserve Water in the Edible Garden.
Thanks, Faye. You know, we had a couple of questions about the flow meter. I don't think too many people have seen that before. Can you give a little more detail on how that works and what some of the settings might be that you would use for typical irrigation?
So I think this is a great opportunity for Judy and Kirby perhaps to also add some information about this in the Q&A box. I do know that they're available through through many hardware stores, and basically you can monitor the amount of water in terms of gallons that that you're delivering into the garden, and using that information will help you to manage the overall household usage of water, depending on the information that you get from your local water district in terms of your usage allotment.
Great. Well, maybe one last question before we get back to the second part of your presentation, and that is the use of soaker hoses. I mean, certainly that's not something we want to turn on from ours. Is there any sort of basic guidance of how long a soaker hose should be used to water, say, a medium-sized tree?
That's a hard question to answer because it really depends on the quality of the soil, and I'll be talking about this in the next few slides. If the soil is coarse and it's not absorbing water readily, it may take longer. Whereas if the soil is light and fluffy and the water is able to be absorbed deep down into the root system, which is if you get anything out of today's lecture, it is, you got to get that water down into the roots. So my recommendation would be to, again, figure out what your water allotment is for your household, and then place the soaker hose around the tree and observe it and get a sense for how quickly, and you can set a timer for this, how quickly is that water being absorbed down into the soil. And you may want to bring in some amendments. And again, I'll get into this into the presentation.
Great, thanks, Faye. I think it kind of brings out the point that, that there's some of these questions do not have simple answers. And that's why people become master gardeners, because a lot of this takes experience and training, and everybody's backyard's a little bit different and everybody's plant selection is a little different. Anyway, let's give Faye a chance to get back to our presentation.
Okay, let me see where I left off here. Okay. All right, so as I promised, how to top dress your soil. So these 2 points are ways that you can reduce your water usage in the garden. You can add mulch and eliminate weeds, and along with those weeds, invasive plants. As I said in talking to Rich, the goal is to retain the water in the soil so your plants remain hydrated. Adding mulch around your plants and trees moderates soil temperature, significantly reduces the rate of water loss and helps to prevent weed growth, which can compete with your plants for water. Since wood mulch is combustible, you don't want to use it within 5 feet of the perimeter of any structure on your property because it can ignite and spread fire towards those structures and under the siding of those structures. Alternative mulches include compost, rocks, or gravel, and frankly, I really like compost, and that's what I use in my garden. I use it to loosen the soil structure. As I said earlier, when the soil is coarse and chunky, it doesn't absorb water efficiently or allow it to filter down to the roots. To have a fire-smart landscape during drought, having soil that has a light structure, like what you see in the photo on the slide, is the most efficient way to target water into the roots of the plants so they remain hydrated. Beyond 5 feet, you can use composted wood chips or medium-sized bark nuggets, and those can be layered up to 2 to 3 inches in depth as you move further away from the home. And eliminating weeds is an essential maintenance task for your garden. You cannot believe how much water weeds absorb. And this year, more than any year, is the year to eliminate weeds often and before they develop into seeds. A great time to pull your weeds is right after you irrigate, when the soil is moist, because moist soil makes it easier to pull by hand and to get the entire root of that weed. And one more note I have to say about irrigation and mulch. Ideally, you always want to water beneath the mulch, but first, before you do that, check with an irrigation specialist to talk about the type of tubing and the emitters that you're using, because not all tubing and not all emitters are designed to allow mulch to be placed on top without them clogging. And things to avoid this season. Well, young plants require frequent irrigation until they're established, and so this year may not be the best year to plant new plants, especially as it begins to heat up. Even young, drought-tolerant, California native and Mediterranean plants require moist root zones while they're getting established, and it can take a year or two to really get those root zones established, depending on the conditions in which they're planted. So if you're at the nursery and you really feel like you need to add plants to your garden, especially within the 0 to 5 foot zone around the perimeter of your home, choose smaller native succulents, which require some but less water than other species. So normally our soils provide nutrients for our plants, but we tend to use fertilizer to boost leaf and flower production, but this increase in foliage requires more water. So again, during water restrictions, most mature landscape plants will survive without additional fertilization. And before May 1, stop watering plants you plan to eliminate, and Kirby will talk a little bit more about this. If you have irrigation in the spot where you remove a plant, plug it up. You can always create a new hole for an emitter if you replace those plants in the future. So when you've eliminated your plants that are stressed or too densely planted, you've pulled all of the weeds and removed invasive plants, you've removed dead debris, and spread all of your compost and mulch to keep water from evaporating from the soil, use your broom to clean up and get some exercise.